Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I just had to get my steps up for a challenge that we were doing at work. I decided to go walk somewhere nice instead of just doing laps of my estate. It was a nice day, so I said I would go for a walk in the woods. What was the worst that could happen? It was going fine, then the path leads through two identical trees. I stepped through and put my hands on both trees. People are saying now that this was a mistake. One was really warm and the other was really wet and cold. I walked on and I think I took a left. The main path kind of branched off to the left and it just went nowhere. It went into a really overgrown forest with really high weeds and plants. I knew it wasn't the path. There were lots of people around. It's a really popular spot, so I walked back and I thought that this wasn't the main path and I should have taken the other way. I took the other way and then that similarly went nowhere. I went back to the fork to start over. I went back and I think I tried to go back the way I came. That also leads me nowhere. I walked back up the main path again, but it didn't look familiar. It was quite overcast at this point as well. I pulled up Google Maps and I didn't have a signal on my phone at all, which is not unusual for that area. I decided to keep trying paths. There were only 3, so I thought I'd eventually get somewhere. I kept walking down a path towards a really overgrown area again. At that point, I heard a really light woman's voice. I don't know how to describe it. It was really high. She was shouting over here. I thought she was probably calling to her kids or something. Then she laughed, and it was just when she laughed, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I have a very professional job. I'm not crazy. I'm quite logical, but then the call came from the other side of me. I knew something wasn't right. Something was just wrong. My first instinct was to run, but I didn't even know where to run. I just remember turning your clothes inside out is supposed to help. So, I just tried that. I felt like it was just mental. I just had to do it. I turned my t-shirt inside out, put it back on. I was hoping nobody was looking at me because it was a really weird thing to do in the middle of a forest. I turned around and walked back and almost immediately came to the 2 trees again. When I turned around and came back, I came to them quicker than when I had been walking in the opposite direction. I didn't even think. I just wanted to get through. Then I could hear the birds again and people and stuff. I didn't know what had just happened. When I got back to the car, I looked at my steps. The last time I checked my step counter, I had done 8,000 steps or something like that. I had put on an extra 10,000 steps. I didn't come from a family that would have believed in that sort of stuff. Certain things just stick in your head, and that's why I remembered turning the clothes inside out. I was scared when she laughed. When she laughed, I didn't think I've words in the English language for it. I had never heard someone laugh like that. I knew something was really wrong. I just got this really bad feeling that things were not going to end well for me if I didn't do something. I wasn't scared until then. When she laughed, I knew something was very wrong. A lot of people have said that it was a stray sod. I always just thought they were nice stories. I love that collectively as a nation we often acknowledge it as a thing. I don't know where all the extra steps on my Fitbit came from. I was surprised by the number of people that it had happened to. We may not believe it, but we still don't ever want to run the risk. I think I just got unlucky. I've been in those woods before. People were saying that the 2 trees on the path were a portal. I have no massive opinion, but something really weird happened. We do so many things on a daily basis instinctively. There are open fields, but every so often there will be a ring of trees in the middle of a field. They will plow around them. Even with our modern farming equipment, they still plow around those trees.
I come from a small village in Ireland. When I was growing up, the population was somewhere around the 900 mark, and it's over 1600 now. Been growing at a steady increase over the last few years. In the early 90s, when I was a kid, pretty much every adult had some sort of ghost story. I'm not even kidding. The amount of stuff I was told was ridiculous, sometimes laughable, but quite often terrifying. Personally, I've had a number of experiences. I know it sounds convenient, but they had a profound effect on my life and still shake me now when I think about them. They're for another time though. Just outside my village there is an old road called the Stump Lane. On the Stump Lane there's the ruins of an old house. It's beaten down to about 2 layers of the stone walls now, and beside it is a tree known to the people of that area as the fairy tree. Further down the lane lives a woman who, when she was a child, used to live in that old house by the fairy tree. It said that her family was forced out of the house by the fairies. You see, the fairy folk were supposed to be pissed at her father, Mr. Bolger, for building a house by their tree. Apparently, not saying I believe this part, but a hell of a lot of people do, there were several attempts made to chop the tree down, but people were quickly put off by the red blood-like substance that would stream from the cuts made by saws or axes, more than likely sap though, right? Down along the middle of the lane, there is a row of about 10 houses that are spaced out over about a kilometer, and 2 fields back behind these is a place simply known as the Fairy Fort. Further down the lane then, there is a separate lane that ventures off to an old farm that is owned by the Dunbar family, I believe. A story I heard about them that dates back to the 30s is an odd one. I cannot give you names, but one of the children, a young teenager at the time, was out picking blackberries one day for his mother but didn't return home. It got late and the mother got very worried. They were a country family in rural Ireland in the 30s, the children were never out late. She sent her husband and other sons out looking for him, but there was no sign of him. 3 weeks went by and they feared the worst, but he did eventually come home, though he was not the same. He came home nursing a sore arm, in fact one of his hands was deformed, it had been changed into a baby's hand. He said he was taken by the fairies, and this was not questioned. It was believed to be the absolute truth. The mother and father apparently tried a number of different things to please the fairies in the hope that they would make their son whole again, but the son died sometime in the 80s if I am remembering what I was told correctly, and with one of his hands small and deformed. So, the changeling. I'm not sure of the date on this one, but it is said to have happened around the outskirts of the village. The woman who told me about the story of the Dunbars shared this one with me too. She told me a boatload of things and really enjoyed sharing stories about the fairies and was a complete believer in them. This is the story of a young woman who was widowed not long after she had given birth. Now fending for herself and a baby, she took on a job picking cabbages. Whilst working one day, her baby was sleeping in a basket along one of the drills. Everything was nice and quiet, until she got home. Her baby was different looking, old looking, the same size, but it looked like an old man. She couldn't leave its side, it would scream and shout for her, and not only that, it would curse and say foul things, laughing as it did. Her family came to visit and were disturbed by the baby. It threw bread at them, and spat at them, snickering and jeering them as it did. When they were leaving, the young lady's father brought her outside. The baby screamed like a banshee. The father told her that the thing inside was not her child and that he was going to send the priest out to her. Sure enough, the priest called out to her and he received the same abuse. He told her to leave the thing outside for 3 days, and no matter how hard it tried to get in, she was to leave it out there. Ignore it, for it was not her child anymore, it was one of the fairies. She didn't want to go through with it, but after suffering for weeks, she left the thing outside. It cried like a baby, sobbing and screaming and pleading. "Mammy, please let me in, Mammy. Don't leave me out here. I'm scared." For 3 days and nights she listened to it bang on the windows, scream for her and weep in ways no person wants to hear. But it all stopped. After the 3rd night, there was silence. She opened the door to find her baby boy had been returned unharmed, safe and grinning. When I was around 8 years old, I had a pal who was over at my house when he told me something that his father had told him and the rest of the family when they were eating dinner the night before. His father was working as a farmhand, and on this day was shearing sheep. He said he got a feeling someone was watching him. He looked around and saw nothing out of the ordinary and continued working. He would again feel a presence around him, though, and this time when he turned he saw a huge man, wearing a top hat and what looked like a cloak. He could not make out any features though. He just said that the man was black, he was just all black. My mother was there when my friend was retelling his father's story, and she would follow it with a story of her own. Well, it was her mother's, my grandmother. She told us that her mother had often spoken of seeing and being followed by a man in a top hat and cloak. My grandmother was not from the village where I lived, she was from a town some 9 miles away. It's a decent-sized town, I guess, and it has plenty of its own stories too, I'm sure. Her house was in a little cul-de-sac that was at the back of an old supermarket. There was a shortcut to her house, a small narrow alley that stretched the length of the store all the way past her house. There were no lights on the actual alley itself, and the walls on either side were pretty high, for the most part. So when it was night, it was really damn dark on that alley. The only light you could see was the light back down at the end that showed from the road where the store was. My grandmother was playing bingo one night, and sure enough, like any other night, she walked up that alley to get home quicker. Halfway up it, she heard footsteps behind her. She stopped and did something she always advised her kids against doing. She turned around to see what was there. There was nothing there. The long narrow laneway was empty. She began to walk again, and once again she heard something behind her. She turned. This time, the hat man walked out of the shadows and stood tall and menacing, a dark silhouette that almost blocked all the light at the end of the alley. She told my mother that she asked him what he wanted and something else. He didn't answer though, and she just turned back and walked home. I'm not sure if she ever saw him again. She was old school though, man, hard as nails, but on the inside she was a cushion. The next time I heard something about him, I was around 20. I was having a few pints with a few mates. We sat down at a table where some old stories were being told. A guy got to talking. Now this man is as straight as they get, no bullshit kind of guy. A country chap who worked his ass off during the week and enjoyed a pint on the weekends. He said he was walking home one night. It was black dark. Man, once you walk out of Ferns, my village, well, back then at least, there were no lights until the next town or village. So, he's walking home when, just like my grandmother, he heard someone walking behind him. He stopped and looked back, and this happened several times, to the point where it sounded like the footsteps were right behind him. He stopped and looked back, nothing there. He turned back to face the way he was going, when there standing in front of him was a tall man with a top hat. He said the man was jet black, so black that he was even more dark and black than the black night that surrounded him. He was frozen, terrified. The hat man walked past him and said nothing, disappearing into the night. The guy who told us this was visibly shaken by what happened and had nothing to gain by making something like that up. We even walked him home that night.
I have had quite a few weird experiences over the years. I don't know why, as I don't think I am particularly psychic. What is strange is that it has only happened since I moved to Ireland. And it's in every place that I have lived in since. These are some events that happened in my first house in Ireland, in a place called Ross's Point, which is in Sligo, a coastal town in the northwest of Ireland. I moved to Ireland from England when I was 9, this would have been in June or July 1997. My dad really wanted to live in Ross's Point. We lived in a camper van for the first while, but then my parents found an old fisherman's cottage with an extension. It was about 100 years old, and built overlooking the channel, which runs from Sligo Bay to Sligo town. Ships still sail into the town via this channel. Ross's Point is a very old fishing village. We moved in during the last week of August 1997. Both my mother and I think that the place was haunted. In fact, we thought most of the houses along the village front were. Everyone has a story to tell. My mom even introduced us to the house when we first moved in, because of the constant feeling of being watched. Anyway, the original cottage, which was the front part, consisted of 2 rooms on either side of a hallway. They were always cold, and the front door never opened unless there was a period longer than 2 weeks of sunny weather. Which is rare. There were no windows to the hallway, but one big window in each room. They both had beautiful views from the window, and faced out onto the village road. My parents took one as a bedroom, and the other was the spare room. My brother and I hated going down the hallway. My brother refused to do it in the dark, even if it was daylight. We used to close our eyes and run down the hall if we had to go down there. Then the extension was built on the back, so that the hallway was the entrance to the extension. Well, should have been, but because of the front door, we always used the side door. Then there was my brother's and my own bedroom upstairs, the living room downstairs, along with a tiny kitchen and minuscule bathroom. You always got the feeling that someone was with you in the spare room. It never got any radio signal, for one thing. I used to keep my rabbit and guinea pig there. One day I was sitting in the room. I must have been about 11 and I heard someone blow just behind me. I freaked out, and it took all my effort to put my pets back in their cage without dropping them. Another time I went in to feed them, to find them out of their cage. The wire had been cut, but there were no clippers around, and my brother swore blind it wasn't him. Years passed, and my mother and I went back to visit my grandmother in England as we passed a house. I remarked on it looking creepy and told her that it would make a good haunted house, and that I was glad that I had never seen a ghost as I would probably die of fear. To which she replied that I had seen a ghost before. She said that a while after we had moved in, I had got up one morning and asked my mom why there was a strange lady in my room the previous night. Apparently, I had woken up for some strange reason and looked down the end of my room to see a lady sitting at my desk. This came with the house. I don't know if it was an antique or what, watching me. I then went back to sleep. My mother remarked on how odd it was for me to mention it and be so sure of it. I described her style of dress, which was late 19th century, too clearly for it to be a dream. She also said that I was remarkably calm about the whole experience, especially as how prone I am to jumping at my own shadow. Things would always go missing in the house, and you'd find them days later in a totally different place that you had nonetheless looked in previously. For example, a very important bill disappeared and then appeared under a pile of washing that had just been taken off the line, 3 days later. When we told a friend of ours who lived down the road a few houses about it a couple of years later, she told us that when she first moved into her own cottage, she was all alone in her room, when 2 fishermen walked in her bedroom door, looked at her and then nodded before turning around and disappearing. She said it was as if they were approving of her and letting her know of their presence. She also said that she could smell cigarette smoke in certain places, even though she didn't smoke. There were many other occurrences that I have forgotten, such as things falling off the wall and such like, but you never felt threatened. I just think they didn't want to be forgotten.
So I had a frightening experience about 3 years back. I'm now a 20-year-old man living in Ireland, Derry City. It's actually in the north of Ireland. But here's how it goes. I decided that I would have an early night, and went to my bed at around 9 p.m. because I'd had a busy day and I just wanted to sleep. A few hours later I awoke and needed to use the bathroom. The time was, if I remember correctly, near 3:15 a.m. I got back into bed feeling wide awake, then all of a sudden, before I even got the chance to get comfortable, I felt my entire body stiffen like a board. I couldn't move anything apart from my head and I screamed out as loud as I could, but there was no sound coming out of my mouth. As I lay there, from the corner of my eye, I began to see this glowing green form appear to the left side of my bed. I didn't get a sense of any harm coming from the apparition and I turned my head to look at it. It began to form outlines of people, and at one point I thought I could see my late grandmother's shape and appearance forming from the glowing object. I wasn't scared at all, I felt Oklahoma. But everything changed. The object got so bright I had to turn my head and look away. I closed my eyes until I had stopped. I thought it had gone. I then turned my head to see a huge figure standing at my bedside. A male at least 6 feet 5 inches, with curly/wavy shoulder-length hair, wearing a brown robe, tied with a belt made from rope or some material similar to it. But his face frightened me the most. It's difficult to put it into words, but I'll try. His face literally looked like it had been polished, really shiny, with a long mouth, and his eyes put the fear of God in me. They were huge, 2 or 3 times the size of any human's eyes, but he didn't stare at me just directly in front of him. I could feel that this thing wasn't good. I could feel the evil coming from him. At one point I could sense the fear traveling from the tips of my toes to the top of my head. I was calling out, trying to move, and nothing would happen. After about 20 seconds of this figure standing alongside my bed, my body began to ease up, and my voice gradually came back. It then disappeared. I jumped out of bed, sweating like a pig. It was as if I just came out of the hot tub. I was so shaken up. I went upstairs to the room where my brothers slept, and sat there the whole night wide awake, listening to footsteps running up and down the stairs and scratching on the door. The next day I told my parents and a few others what had happened. They tried to dismiss it as just a dream. I haven't experienced anything like this before or since. And it was 100% not a dream. I researched my street a little bit, and supposedly it was built on top of an old monastery from a few centuries back. Could it have been a monk? Whatever it was evil.
My dad is from Donegal, a rural county in the Republic of Ireland, and my family have gone over every summer since I was born. Normally it is a fun, family-filled affair. All of my aunties and uncles and many cousins join us and we spend a fortnight or so on the beach and enjoying the Merry from Dunglow festival. Last year, my younger sister and younger cousin decided to head over for the festival without our parents. We decided to stay in the house where my granny and my father grew up, an old house hidden from the road and not too far from the town. I had never stayed over in the house before but had heard a lot of stories from my older sister and my aunties about the house having spirits in it. I wasn't too worried. If there was anything, which I doubted, they would be related to me and wouldn't harm me. On the day we arrived, we were getting ready to go out for our first of many nights of the festival. I felt very uneasy in the house and couldn't put my finger on it. I had been here before, many times, when my great auntie and uncle had stayed here before moving to a more modern home on the hill, but now it felt different. As I got dressed and put on my makeup, I felt very watched. I can't describe it in any other way than saying I felt as though someone was right at my shoulder, breathing down my neck. I continuously felt like I could see something out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned there was nothing there. We came home from our night out about 2 a.m. and had decided, for the holiday, to all stay in the same room, my sister and cousin in the double bed and me on a mattress beside the chest of drawers. That night was one of the strangest nights of my life. I kept waking up, shivering with cold, then would fall asleep only to wake later, sweating and overheated. One of the times I woke up, I looked up at the bed and saw that my cousin and sister were both wide awake. In the morning we laughed it off, but throughout the holiday the same thing would happen. We would move around the house, feeling watched. We would wake up at the exact same time every night, and on one occasion I went into the kitchen to find all the chairs pulled out from the table, left askew. I don't know why, but I managed not to be too afraid. I told myself it was an old house, that's why the fire didn't help the cold, the footsteps were just the creaking walls and the feeling of being watched. I must have been overtired from the bad night's sleep. However, when the festival was over, things took a turn for the worse and I could no longer convince myself there was nothing going on. One night I woke up, wide awake at 3 a.m. like so many nights before, but this time I heard the sound of whistles. It can't be a tin whistle, I told myself, it's just my sister or cousin's breathing. But then it began to move more melodically, a tune. I tried to close my eyes and pretend it wasn't happening until I fell asleep. In the morning my cousin told me that she had woken up in the night and heard tin whistles. I asked her not to tell my sister. The next night I woke up again to a noise. It sounded like a saw or wood against wood, friction. I turned my head to the chest of drawers close to me and saw the copper handle swinging. Something had been opening and shutting the drawer to wake me up. I was petrified and tried to sleep. Finally there came a night when I lay my head down on the mattress and felt it move, jolting. As if someone had pushed my mattress, with me on it, across the way towards the chest of drawers. I sat up and saw how much space there was between me and the chest of drawers, a good few inches. I laid back down and told myself it wasn't happening. A few minutes later I felt the push again. I sat up and instantly lay back down again. My mattress was pushed right up against the chest of drawers. I felt as though whatever was in the house was isolating me and trying hard to get me to talk about it to my family, but I didn't want to scare them. Finally it all was too much for me and I booked the ferry back home, 4 days earlier than I was meant to return. I felt terrible leaving my sister and cousin, but I couldn't stand it anymore. On the last night I spent there I woke up, 3 a.m. in the morning, and felt as though there was someone outside my room. I could hear incredibly quiet whispers, almost like a vibration from outside the bedroom door. As if 2 people were discussing something. At this point I was angry. They had ruined my holiday, so inside my head I said, if you are going to say something, just say it, stop whispering. There was silence and then, very audibly, I heard the word girls. I lay there, absolutely terrified, and just a few moments later my cousin woke up. I didn't tell her what had happened. I went home that morning, but weeks later, at a big family dinner, I was speaking to my cousin and she revealed, like me, she had experienced a lot of things that she didn't tell me because she didn't want to upset me. We told each other what we had been keeping to ourselves, and our experiences were very similar. My aunties chipped in too and told us frightening stories about the house and the spirits. My cousin and I discovered we had both woken up to the sound of bicycle bells from outside in the lane. She also said she felt as though there was a woman in the house called Nance, but she wasn't related to us. My other cousin then admitted that one night she slept over and saw a woman in her room, standing at the mantelpiece, facing away. My aunties told us that Nance was our great-grandmother's friend who would often visit the house, riding down the lane on her bicycle. It all sounds unbelievable, and to be honest, I wouldn't have believed it had it not happened to me. Needless to say, I shall not be staying in the old house this year. Or ever again for that matter.
This took place in my friend's house, which is only a few doors down from my parents'. My friend has lived there, I'd say as long as we had, if not longer. She lives with her husband and 3 small children, and we've been friends a long time. I confided in her my tale about living in Ross's Point and the weird dreams I'd been having in my parents' house. My friend then told me about her own experiences. About a little girl's spirit that had followed her for years, since she had dug up an old coin in her grandmother's garden. My friend still has this coin, but it disappears on occasion and returns somewhere exceedingly odd months later. My friend was told the spirit was protecting her, that the little girl was a deceased member of her family. She likes to make herself known by flushing the downstairs toilet and moving things around if she feels out of sorts, redecorating, moving, holidays, birth of child, etc. In one instance, while my friend was watching television after eating some cereal, she looked over to the double doors to the kitchen only to find the bowl on the floor between the 2 doors, after she expressly remembers placing it in the sink some 5 meters away to the left. However, it only showed itself to female family members. I used to babysit on occasion for my friend. I wasn't worried about this spirit because it only showed itself to family members, and I was not. However, tonight I had put the children to bed and was watching a horror film when I heard the downstairs toilet flush. I leaped off the couch as I hadn't heard any movement from upstairs. Thinking I was being foolish, I went to check on the children and all 3 were fast asleep. Thoroughly freaked out, I went to sit back in the living room and had to turn off the movie and put one of the kids' films back on. My friend thought it was hilarious, and said I was part of the family now. I was and still remain entirely unthrilled about it. A few months later, I think just after the DVD release of Paranormal Activity, I went down to my friend's to watch it. You'd think I'd learn, right? But I hadn't had another experience since my initiation, so I didn't worry about it. Whilst watching the film, the curtain edge closest to the TV peeled back, and then fell back into place. It repeated a few more times. My friend asked if I'd seen it and I told her yes. We decided to ignore it and focus on the film. Then a helium balloon her youngest had brought home began to rotate round in circles. My friend popped it and things fell silent again. Fast forward to 2011, August. I had moved to the bottom of Gallows Hill and was 6 months pregnant with my first. My friend's family had gone on holiday for a week, and asked me to take care of her 2 cats. One had just had a litter of 3 kittens, 2 guinea pigs and assorted fish. This was fine, as my mother and fiancé were to help me with their litter trays. I just had to feed them all. I developed a routine, and 3 days in the trouble started. In the morning, would go and open the curtains in each room. I had to use the hallway to get to the kitchen as my friend had leashed the double doors into the living room shut with an old dog lead. I would feed the fish and put their light on. Then the cats and kittens would be fed and watered. They had the run of the house except for the bathrooms, and then I would go down and change guinea pigs water and feed them. Then in the evening, would close all the curtains again, turn off the tank light, feed all the animals again and turn on either the landing or hall light, thus making it look like someone was home. On the 3rd day I brought my mother with me to change the litter tray. When I was opening the curtains I found I had not closed one pair the night before, even though I thought I had double-checked the night before. At first I reasoned maybe one of the kittens had done it, but then how they hooked themselves back. I put it down to human error. That night, my mother helped me check that I had closed them all. The next morning, same thing, different set of curtains. The spirit was playing with me. Every night and morning, one set of curtains would either be open or closed somewhere around the house. I decided not to let it bother me. I was only there for 20 minutes at the most. On the 6th day, I thought she'd left me in peace. My fiancé was cleaning the litter tray and I went into the youngest's bedroom, thus proving the curtains had been left closed and untampered with. It was only when I turned round to go, I found her built-in closet door pulled open and its contents thrown on the floor. I know some cats can open doors, but surely not pull doors open? I threw the items back in and shut it quickly, knowing my friend didn't like the cats in the cupboards. I quickly left. The next day was even more extraordinary. I went through the motions as normal, fish first then cats. As I entered the kitchen and went to open the cat tin, I saw a very disturbing sight. There on the counter was the dog lead my friend had used to keep the double doors shut, neatly folded. Certainly no cat could do that. I was the only one with a key, and I seriously doubt someone breaking in would leave behind the valuables and only do that. I rushed through my chores, relashed the door, and just before I slammed the door shut for the last time, I called out, "They're home tonight. I promise." These experiences weren't frightening or threatening. I think she just wanted to let me know that she was there, protecting the house. Or maybe she was wondering where the family had gone. I've never been terrified of that home, not like I had on my own. Perhaps the homes being built on hanging ground makes the homes more susceptible to such things. What do you think?
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.